Hey everyone, my name is Steven and I want to share a little bit about my Rooted experience and specifically about generosity. So I was in a Rooted group a couple years ago with guys. I was in a men's group and we had just some awesome conversations. And especially this was true when it came to talking about generosity. I grew up in a Christian home and so I knew a lot about giving and really the biblical and theological background behind Old Testament tithing, New Testament, Jesus talked about sacrificial giving, and those were all concepts that I understood. But the truth was is I struggled a lot, especially as a young adult, when it came to giving and becoming generous. And so one of the things that we talked about in Rooted that was so powerful was the difference between viewing things through this lens of ownership or stewardship. And I realized that for a lot of my life, I understood things through that lens of ownership, that my money, my resources, it was mine, I owned it. We had some great conversations looking at God and His character and really the fact that God is ultimately the owner of everything, including our resources and our finances. And in those conversations, I remember having just really difficult conversations that were encouraging and challenging to think through how do we understand the call that Jesus gives us to become more and more generous. And part of that shift happens when we understand things through that stewardship lens, that whatever we've been given, ultimately, it belongs to God. And I remember we were having these great conversations in that Rooted group, and there was this quote that came about that was really powerful and shifted a lot of things for me. And the quote was by this guy named Richard Foster. He's a writer and theologian. And he said that the right question to ask in stewardship is not how much of my money should I give to God, but how much of God's money should I keep for myself? And just that insight alone was kind of mind-boggling. And I remember just having these really awesome experiences of encouraging one another to grow in generosity. Because when you look at God and who He is and God's character, He's the most generous being to ever live. In fact, God gave us the most extravagant gift of all time by sending Jesus. And John writes in the letter that he pens, "This is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and gave His Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins." So my Rooted experience was phenomenal. It was really a great time, made some awesome connections, drew in relationships with some amazing men at FCC, and also just learned a little bit more about this rhythm of generosity and what it looks like to become someone who's pursuing Jesus and increasingly becoming more and more generous because that is who God is. Now, if you're watching this, maybe you're thinking about joining Rooted this fall, and my encouragement would be to sign up, to give it a try. You're gonna make some great connections, you'll have some wonderful friendships come out of it, some great community, and also you'll learn a little bit more about your own walk with God and what it means to be someone who's following after Jesus and someone who is learning these rhythms that are really practices that we own and we start to live into that help us follow Jesus and experience the full life that He has for us.